Hello everyone, good morning and welcome back to the StarCityGames.com Season 3 Invitational here from Atlanta. Part of the SCG Tour and brought to you by the wonderful people over at Ultimate Guard. It is our pregame show leading into the elimination rounds, and I'm your host, Cedric Phillips, and I'm joined once again by Patrick Sullivan.
Good morning.
Matthias Hunt.
5 combo decks in the top 8. This is going to be a great Sunday.
Yeah, okay. And Ryan Overturf. No Delver decks, man, sorry.
Well, wrong format. Jim Davis is playing something that's similar and like kind of bad, so.
Not really sure what to expect from him, but we're going to get to that here on our pregame show. Standard is the name of the game for the top 8, as Matthias mentioned. 5 combo decks, 5 Aetherwork Marvel decks to kind of go over. We're going to analyze each matchup here for you guys, make some predictions as well, and then decide who we think is going to win this whole thing and get themselves $10,000, an invite to our Players Championship, an invite to Pro Tour Aether Revolt, their likeness on a card, and a whole bunch more. But where we're going to start is our Players Championship situation. After we kind of worked our way through all 16 rounds yesterday, the picture is a lot clearer now. The scenarios are pretty simple. So as we take a look here at our first image of the Players Championship and who's qualified, you see new faces there. So we do want to congratulate Todd Stevens, Joe Lissette, Caleb Shear, Bradley Carpenter, Jacob Baugh, Bradley Nelson, and a mystery person on their qualification for the Players Championship. Now the scenarios are actually pretty simple, given how difficult they were coming into the weekend. If Jim Davis wins this tournament, Todd Anderson, welcome to Roanoke. Welcome to the Players Championship. If Jacob Baugh wins this tournament, Todd Anderson, welcome to Roanoke. Welcome to the Players Championship. That's literally it. So Todd has 2 horses in this race, guys. And Patrick, do you think either one of them can get the job done?
Well, yeah, like you said, very simple stuff. 2 of the players that we have in the top 8 are already qualified, so that opens up a slot here if one of those 2 should win the whole thing. Anything can happen. My prediction of who is going to win the top 8, which we'll get to a little bit later in the broadcast, is not one of those 2 players. I think ultimately Todd's going to be on the outside looking in.
Okay.
But again, anything can happen.
Well, we're going to make our way through some elimination rounds here in just a little bit. Players are kind of rolling in, getting ready. We know they've been testing all night long. And we're going to start with the cowboy. Tip your hat. Ben Friedman. Tommy Bahama?
Mr. Tommy Bahama himself.
Mr. Tommy Bahama, as Patrick likes to call him. Ben Friedman's match against Colin Mullins. It's going to be Naya Aetherworks against Green Red Aetherworks. So this is our first of a couple combo decks here, Matthias.
Right.
I know this is kind of your wheelhouse. You don't like to pay for your expensive spells. So tell me kind of how you're analyzing this going in.
Well, some of these decks have a medium amount of interaction, depending on what they think they're trying to do in the format. You'll see cards like Harness Lightning, Kozilek's returns anywhere from 0 to 2 in the main, that sort of thing. All of that's going to be bad today. So the question is, who is the most streamlined, who is to do what they're going to do, making Emrakul's. The mirror here actually has a lot of play to it. You know, Ishkana spiders are more relevant than you would think, but a lot of it is going to be who has the least amount of dead cards. And between the 2 of them, I would say you have about a 4 or 5 card advantage, at least in the first non-sideboard games, for Ben Friedman in this matchup.
Ryan, how are you feeling about things? Obviously, on one side, you've got like the traditional green-red build, and the other side, you've got Naya that's splashing for Sigarda. Probably helps Ben out a little bit, yeah?
It does. The ability to give yourself hexproof is certainly relevant. The build that you would really like to be on in the mirror is the teamer version to have access to actual counter spells on the sideboard. In this mirror, I feel like play draw is very, very important. Just being able to combo off first, maybe get your Marvel on turn 4, hopefully be able to activate it already, get your Emrakul down. If everything is going according to plan, you can just stop your opponent from being able to do really anything.
Now, obviously, both these decks, Patrick, are very, very explosive. You said this would be a good weekend to kind of play the Marvel decks, maybe take a risk. Both these players have done that, and it's obviously worked out very well for them. Do you think either player has an advantage?
I think Ben Friedman has a slight advantage for the 2 reasons that my colleagues already articulated. I think play draw is a factor in the matchup,
okay.
And I think Ben has a slight edge when it comes to dead weight in the main deck. That said, there's a lot of static to sound in the matchup. People can definitely win on the draw. There's a lot of times where the exact construction of your deck is kind of irrelevant. It's just, do you have the best draw? So the player on the draw can certainly win, but I think Friedman does have a slight edge both with play draw and deck construction.
Now, I don't have a lot of experience in this matchup. Is there any card, Matthias, Ryan, Patrick, that really stands out to you? I mean, Marvel is obviously very, very important. Sigarda, I think, is going to help in a mirror breaker, but what can Collins do to maybe get back in this match? Is there anything?
Well, he should Aetherworks Marvel better than Ben. Would really be a great thing. If his 6 cards finds Emrakul and Ben's doesn't, it's going to be a really. I mean, yeah, that sounds very straightforward, but I can't. There's a randomness to that part of the deck, and hitting it better than your opponent does matter.
Is this the only shot that he has, Ryan? Is it just better marveling? You know, they have similar cards. You know, they both have Ishkana, they have Emrakul, they have Marvel, all that stuff. The builds are somewhat similar. Obviously, Ben has Sigarda, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But, you know, it's easy for us to all select Ben, and I think most of us did for this match. Like, is there anything Collins can do for the Collins-Mullen fan club out there?
Yeah, some of these games, they do end up kind of being grindy, honest affairs where you're casting kind of an honest Ishkana, but one of you eventually is going to break it open with your Marvel. There's no way to interact with energy once you start pooling it, but by design in the format, and I agree with Matthias, it's just the best strategy is to hope to get lucky.
Yeah, is that all we can do?
It's not really a matchup that lends itself to a lot of nuance, or I'm gonna approach this really differently.
Sure.
There's still a huge margin for error because, you know, it's two very explosive combo decks. Aetherworks Marvel has an element of randomness woven into it. So, I mean, even though I think Ben has an advantage, I think we all agree Ben has an advantage, it's certainly not 100-0. I mean, there's a lot of just randomness baked into the percentages. And even if Ben has an edge being on the play and with deck construction, I don't think he has ultimately that big of a mathematical edge.
Yeah, I think that, you know, marveling and all that stuff, the randomness, as you did mention, Matthias, you know, that all is going to play a role. Mulligan's going to play a role. Obviously, that's a part of Magic. But, you know, the Sigardas, even when they get to the sideboard, I don't think Mullen has anything that can even really match up with that.
Yeah, Ben is a slightly better main deck, and his cyber plan slightly better. Now, to say that it's just going to be, you know, a roll of the dice might not be completely fair. A lot of times in these Marvel mirrors, the boards can actually get pretty intricate. You can get Emrakuls happening on both sides, Ishkanas on both sides. It's unclear who's going to win. You see that a lot of times even in Delirium mirrors, right? So there is actually a lot of onboard gameplay, which can be hard to play correctly. So the other out, which you could say for Collins, is if he can analyze and just be a stronger tactical player on the board than Ben, he has a chance, but that's a really tall order. Ben Friedman was 13-1 for a reason.
Yeah, I mean, Ben Friedman coming into this tournament, 9 open top 8s, 1 open win. This is his 5th invitational top 8. For Colin Mullins, who's someone who's actually kind of made his way up the leaderboard a little bit, a lot of people haven't really noticed because he's not the biggest name. He's got 1 open top 8. This is his first invitational top 8. We know who the more experienced and more accomplished of the players in this matchup is going to be, and it looks like a lot of things that are sliding Ben's way. As we work our way through our pick'em, I'll be the one to start. I'm going to go with Ben. I think that just the deck lists line up very well for him. I think he's a more experienced player here. You know, obviously, randomness factor can play a role in Mullen's favor, but it's just hard for me to pick against the guy who was basically #1 all weekend long.
Exactly. I'm a Ben Friedman guy as well here on the play. Very strong player, slightly better deck construction. Again, there's only so confident you can be in a pick like this because the matchup is a little bit on the random side. But I think over the long haul, Ben has an edge.
Matthias, we go to you.
Of the 8 players in the top 8, as far as tactical play, I think Ben has the highest ceiling of any of the guys here. I don't think he's going to lose it on the board. I'm going to pick Ben.
Ryan.
I picked Ben as well. Kind of the one thing you can really do to leverage your advantage in the mirror when both players have Emrakuls. If you attack an Emrakul into an Emrakul plus Spider and you're controlling combat with your Mindslave return, you can assign all the damage to the Spider and just eat your opponent's Emrakul. So yeah, there's some play that you can take advantage of. I don't expect Friedman to miss anything like that. I expect him to manage it well. I'm picking Ben.
And I know that Nick Miller is going to make this one a clean sweep. So we expect to see the #1 overall seed, that is Ben Friedman, Tommy Bahama, going to be moving on to the semifinals. So we will see how that is going to unfold. As we work our way into our other match now, it's going to be the players' champion, that is Jim Davis. This one's going to be a little bit more interesting to discuss against Jeffrey Serwinski. It's going to be Esper Aggro against Green Red Aetherworks. We told you there's a lot of Aetherworks in the top 8, this 5 of them. However, Jim's deck, in theory, is geared to beat Aetherworks. He's playing, you know, it's more of a white-blue flash deck that has Scrap Heap Scrounger, is honestly what Jim's deck is up to. It's a little bit lower to the ground with Toolcraft Exemplar, a more aggressive build. But Ryan, I'm going to come to you. He's got the card that probably matters the most in Spellqueller.
Yeah, Spellqueller, just being able to exile Aetherworks Marvel, get ahead of that. It is vulnerable to Harness Lightning, so there is some play going on here. Jim's backup main deck counter and Revolutionary Rebuff is not good against Aetherworks Marvel. It can't counter an artifact. It can counter the Honest Ishkana if that's kind of how they're going up the curve, so he has that advantage. And then post-sideboard, Spell Shrivel will be able to deal with all of the problematic cards. I like Jim's odds here. I don't like that there's no Avacens in the deck. That's going to be a problem. In particular, if some Spider tokens do appear, that's the best way for traditional blue-white flash to reset. So he does lose points there, but I like a lot of what he's doing.
Matthias, how about you? How do you feel about things for this particular matchup?
Well, traditionally, as we've been saying, the blue-white flash decks are good against Aetherworks. Aetherworks is a great combo deck, but it's soft to islands and blue cards, and Jim has a lot of them. Now, there are some things that are going to make this closer in a lot of ways. Jim's lower to the ground. He has less of these flash cards, meaning sweepers, removal. They do get better against him, and now that we're seeing a more green-red Aetherworks, this is going to be a closer matchup.
The thing about these Aetherworks Marvel decks is, at the Pro Tour, they were all in. It was Fine Marvel with like the Crane and a bunch of bad cards.
Glass Blowers, Puzzle Knot.
Yeah, just like a bunch of mediocre cards. And then you have a counterspell. Okay, you win, that's it. House of Cards crumbles. These builds now have backup plans. They have Tireless Tracker, they have Ishkana. They can play a regular game of Magic, Patrick. We saw Jim, we covered a match of Jim against, I believe it was Ben Friedman.
Yes.
And Jim got destroyed. Now, I don't know if that's going to be the case here, but if we're going to draw from limited sample size, this matchup doesn't look good for him at all based off of what we watched.
It was a little bit curious too. I mean, Jim's draws were not great, granted, but the games were not particularly close. Without Avacyn in the deck, there is just a raw power issue that Jim is facing here, and just getting his early draws picked apart by some removal spells, be it Kozilek's Return or some Galvanic Bombardment type of cards out of the sideboard, then he doesn't really have enough powerful cards to pull himself back in the game. And a Spell Shrivel or a Spell Queller is only going to hold off an Aetherworks Marvel deck for so long. I do think that there's an advantage here for Jim in the matchup, but it's a lot less than you would typically associate with Flash against Aetherworks Marvel.
Yeah, typically this matchup is kind of a runaway, Ryan. It's, you're leaving all your mana up, all this stuff. Jim's deck is playing more, honestly, like a Merfolk Fish-esque deck. Get some pressure on the battlefield, have one counter or a Spell Queller and hope it's good enough. I don't know against these normalized builds if that can actually be the case of what Jim's playing against.
He's really relying on getting ahead and staying ahead, and something that does impact that with the Marvel decks having access to Harness Lightning to kill Spell Queller. With Jim not utilizing Selfless Spirit Avacyn, he has very few tools to protect the Spell Queller. It's just redundant Spell Quellers, really. So he's really relying on drawing a very small set of cards. These cards are very good, but he just has less access than traditional builds.
Now, he's getting more aggressive, Matthias, and obviously getting ahead, staying ahead is where he wants to be, but, I feel like he wouldn't have picked this deck if it didn't have a good Aetherworks Marvel matchup. But as I'm sitting here discussing things with you guys, if the draw for Jeffrey is, Aetherworks Marvel, I feel like he's probably going to lose. If the draw is, I don't know, Tracker, Harness Lightning, let's play a little bit of Magic, it feels like Jim is probably going to lose. Am I wrong about that?
I think what's happened is we started from this point of the Pro Tour where you're looking at all-in Aetherworks Marvel and these more controlling blue-white flash decks, and blue-white was ahead by a mile. So much so that the blue-white players started to say, let's give away some of our Aetherworks cards for some better other matchups. And the Aetherworks players were saying, let's get away from this all-in to give myself some better play in this matchup. And both people pulled this matchup closer to the center. And I think it was such a foregone conclusion that we haven't know how much that's happened. But as you were saying yesterday, is blue-white even that much of a favorite anymore when the builds start to look like this? And that's what we're going to find out this round.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. Again, you and I covered the match. We saw Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot just be, what is that? Two or three turns, a bunch of energy. We know that the Marvel decks, because the first game we watched with Ben, activate Marvel and again, and again, and again. So it's not like, if the Marvel misses the first time, let's say it slides into play. If it misses the first time, it's like, oh, okay, we're through this part of the game. We know that's not the case now with how these Marvel decks work. I just don't know. The sideboards will probably play a role in things. We know that because they always do, but Jim is the more accomplished player of the two. We know that. We know Jim's resume. He's the player's champion. He's going to Roanoke in 2 weeks, no matter what. But again, as I discuss this more and more and kind of running it through my head, I'm not sure how good this is for him.
Well, I agree. I mean, we'll get to our picks in a moment here. I hate to be this reductive about it, but ultimately I don't know if Jim's deck has enough good Magic cards in it.
Sure.
I mean, and he cut one of the best ones, the top end of the curve, for something low to the ground to add a little bit more pressure. But that's a card that plays very well into sweepers and spot removal spells, as we saw in Jim's match against Ben Friedman yesterday. So, I still think that Jim has some edge here, but I wonder if that's just something in the back of my mind saying Flash is good against Aetherworks Marvel, and not what do the 75 cards look like against the other 75 cards.
For Sawinski, it's his first invitational top 8. For Davis, he's got 11 open top 8s, 2 open wins. 3 invitational top 8s. This is his 3rd. Obviously the reigning Players Champion. He's headed back to the Players Championship regardless of the outcome here this weekend. So we're going to see him in 2 weeks. The question is, how much are we going to see him today? As we take a look at our pick'ems, I think I went with Jim. That sounds really confident. Yeah, I did. Yeah. I don't know. We can't update that graphic now. I'm picking Jim. It's hard for me to go against the experience here, honestly. It's hard for me to believe that he would come to this tournament, make the top 8, and I know we watched him get destroyed by Ben, who had a really good weekend, but it's just hard for me to believe that he didn't play this deck enough to the point where he's like, you know what, I'm confident enough in my Aetherworks Marvel matchup. I'm going to guess it goes 5 now because I'm not feeling great about it, but I'm going to go with the guy who's just more accomplished of the 2.
Yeah, I mean, my pick as well here was Jim Davis, and I don't know, do I prefer Coke to Pepsi, or does my brain not work right? And if you switch what was in the can, I would like the red can instead of the blue can.
Sure.
I don't know which one it is here.
Sure.
I think, again, part of it is exactly the rationale you just said. I don't think Jim could justify bringing this deck to the tournament and shaving out Aetherworks Marvel cards if he still didn't feel ultimately like his matchup was very good. He did go 7-1 in the standard portion. It's not like he had a bad run with this deck, but I have low confidence in this pick, even though I'm taking Jim.
Sure, we watched the match that he lost, so that's certainly affecting our decision.
Yeah,
Matthias,
sure.
I go to you.
The card I want to look at here is Kozilek's Return. So Jim's switched his deck that he has Toolcraft Exemplars and Scrap Heap Scroungers, which means more than before, his Blue Light Flash list is actually pretty soft to Kozilek's Return. And when you look at Serwinski's deck, there are no copies of it in the main, and we're playing 2 pre-board games. So I do think there is a window here for Jim to lose to Marvel, and I think it might happen this tournament. I'm not saying I'm going to pick him against every Marvel deck he plays, but I'm going to pick him against this one. It's going to be Jim Davis.
Ryan, I go to you.
I'm also picking Jim here. When I play blue decks and I'm trying to have permissive elements, I tend to really load up on them. So when I see lists that are lighter on them, I'm not terribly confident when I look at just percentages. But we're playing 5 games, and the games that he wins, it only relies on him drawing 1 to 2 counter spells, really. So he has trimmed on the elements that are going to be especially good in this matchup, but it doesn't really take a lot to win a number of these games. Some of the hands for the Marvel deck, a deck that is kind of prone to mulliganing. It's going to be less consistent at executing its game plan. A lot of these games can be decided just by a spell queller. So for that reason, I got to stick with Jim.
Nick Miller has also selected Jim Davis. We filled this out before we went on air, and I think we were all kind of confident about Jim, but as we work our way through the analysis, if Jim ends up losing this match and we kind of replay the games, it's like, okay, well, his counter suite didn't come together, or there was a turn where he had to tap out and cross his fingers, there was no Marvel, no Ishkana, and that landed, and his deck is bad at coming back from Ishkana.
Well, yeah.
Really bad.
And this is the evolution of the Aetherworks Marvel deck. Before, if the Flash deck was a little bit slow out of the gate, that was okay because you could just hold up a counter spell and the Marvel deck couldn't really win. Now, with the deck able to play kind of a regular game of Magic, there is pressure on Jim to get something going early on in the game and then hold up his counter spells. To Jim's credit, he has adjusted the deck exactly in that fashion. Avacyn becoming Scrap Heap Scrounger means that he gets a 1-2 now hold up my shield draw more often than the traditional builds do. But it also means he's more vulnerable to spot removal spells early on in the game.
Well, we're going to say how that matchup does shake out soon enough. We've got 2 other matches to cover. We're going to take a short commercial break here from Atlanta, a couple words from our good friends over at Ultima Guard, and then we're going to talk about whatever the heck Joe Bernal is playing. So we'll see you guys back here for that in just a sec.
The StarCityGames.com Creature Collection presents Fintuition. Starting in December, get sleeves, playmats, player bundles, and more at go.starcitygames.com/creature collection. If you're looking for more Fintuition, check out Game Night. Bringing friendly competition and exclusive prizes to stores worldwide, Game Night features Fintuition tokens and pins all throughout December. Head to go.starcitygames.com/game night and find a store near you.
We are back, everybody. Welcome back to the StarCityGames.com Season 3 Invitational here from Atlanta, part of the SCG Tour, and brought to you by the awesome people at Ultimate Guard. Center Phils, Patrick Sullivan, Matthias Hunt, Ryan Overturf. We're going over our predictions here for our elimination rounds of our Invitational. Going to crown a champion here soon enough. $10,000, invite to Pro Tour, Aether Revolt in the Players' Championship, likeness on a card, fame and fortune, all that good stuff that we obviously care about here in the booth and they care about out there. We're getting on to our next match here. Now, funny story that you guys don't know about Joe Bernal. I've known Joe Bernal for a very long time. Chicago player. I went to college at Purdue outside of Indianapolis. Played a lot of Chicago PTQs. I've known Joe, I'm 30, so for the better half, like 10 years. Joe, at one of our tournaments, I think it was Vegas last year, he was playtesting some games with some people sitting down, and he was like, you know what? You guys in the booth should just be meaner and funnier like Osip was back in the day. Mm-hmm. Just be harsh with your critiques and make jokes and stuff like that. No problem.
Yeah, we can meet him halfway on this one.
If Joe wants that, we can do that, because I don't know what this is.
And Joe was very helpful here. He gave us a lot of ammunition for jokes this week.
He did. His opponent is Jacob Boss, someone he knows very well because they're both from the same area. Jacob has had one heck of a tournament. He had to really, really do well here to qualify for the Players' Championship, and he has done that. He jumped people in the Season 3 race. He jumped people in the overall Player of the Year race, all that stuff. He's done his job. Kudos to him with his Naya Aetherworks deck. Joe Bernal, a bit more outspoken, really good guy. We're going to have some fun here with his black-green Delirium deck because, Matthias, I don't know what this is.
Well, what I think it is it's just a great piece of deck building here. So what I like about Joe's list is, first of all, his commitment to removal spells. 4 dead weights, 4 murders, 4 grasp of darkness. How did he do all this, you might ask? And you know what he did? He cut all the do-nothings from the deck.
Okay.
And just, I don't know why none of us didn't see it before. Grapple with the Past, Vessel of Nascency. What do those cards even do? Get rid of them. So that's exactly where Joe is.
He also cut Emrakul, which is an important piece to this deck generally, Patrick. We're trying to make sense of his list because when you take a look at Black Green Delirium lists like what Brian Braun played, Brad Nelson played, kind of the industry standard for Black Green Delirium, you see the build of the deck and the couple of bullets for Traverse and Grapple and like Liliana's, and it all kind of makes sense. And then you see this really removal heavy build, which admittedly probably destroys Flash, but I don't think he can ever beat Marvel.
Well, certainly not game 1. We had to play 2 of the pre-boarded games. Pro Tour Houston back in the day, the one that Justin Gary won, my deck was stolen 2 days before the event. And I had to build a black-green rock deck, a black-green deck, out of the cards in Gerard Fabiano's backpack that he happened to bring to the Pro Tour.
Okay.
And I get nostalgic for that moment looking at Joe Bernal's deck list because it just looks like someone had a box of green and black cards that are legal and standard and built a deck out of it. I imagine his Flash matchup is very, very good. I imagine his Vehicles matchup is also very solid because he's big on the battlefield and he's loaded with removal. But you're going to pay cost in some other matchups. I would imagine some of that cost is Delirium decks that are going bigger and have that redundant, really powerful late game. And then here against Aetherworks Marvel, where he just has a lot of removal in his main deck.
Look, every time I cover a match, I want to say, you know what, this could happen for Joe to win, and this could happen for Joe to win. Ryan, what can happen for Joe to win? I mean, game 1 seems like a complete nightmare.
We had Joe on camera during the tournament playing this deck, and his opponent cast Emrakul, and he conceded to the trigger. And that's pretty much what this deck does. I used to play Joe a lot around the 2013, a lot in Legacy. And Grapple with the Past is this card that helps you facilitate land drops. It's a really great late game spell to find whatever creature. It's kind of like Demonic Tutor in the late game. It's really reminiscent of Brainstorm in a lot of ways. And to see Joe cut this card from his deck kind of personally offends me.
So when looking at the deck list as we were reviewing them this morning, it really drives me home. For me, there's no Emrakuls in the main, no Emrakuls in the 75. When you're building it, there is a slot of where at one point was up to 2 Verdurous Gearhulks that has only been half crossed off on the sheet. You didn't play him right now, but that was the line we were on when designing it.
Yeah, I mean, he's obviously trying to go beatdowns. I know that. He's got a lot of removal, like you mentioned. He's good against Vehicles. If his deck's not good against Flash, I don't know how he did this.
It has to be great against
Flash.
Flash.
It has to be great against Flash.
He's going to be good against the Servant to the Conduit draws out of Aetherworks, too. Those things are just never untapped.
That's true. That's true. If you're relying on mana accelerants, those things are dead and your draw is dead. Look, it's not going to be easy mode for Jacob. I think his deck is very well positioned for the tournament. I think his deck is well positioned for the top 8. I think his deck is well positioned for the matchup. For me, and Yeah, and Jacob's on the play? What? How?
It's a bad matchup. I mean, you can hope for some stumbles. I mean, sometimes the Marvel decks do have a fail rate.
Yeah.
You can hope to clean it up somewhat post board, where you get to cut some of your whatever 16 spot removal spells for discard or whatever interaction, but it's going to be a challenge. No two ways about it.
I mean, I've got Jacob because I just don't feel like I have a choice. I can't imagine Joe winning this match. I just feel like so much over if it's 3 games, sure. Like something weird can happen. One of the games is pre-sideboard, 2 of them are post-sideboard. But 2 games pre, Jacob's on the play because of higher seed. I'm picking Jacob. Jacob, I'm sorry we're not talking about you more, but this just feels, at least to me, like easy street. I know you're with Jacob as well here.
I have been wrong enough about predictions that have seemed lopsided in the past to make this pick with a degree of humility. It is still Magic. Joe Bernal is a great Magic player. Post board, he does get to clean up a little bit of around the edges of this removal spell deck that he's playing this weekend, but I still think that Jacob is a big favorite.
Matthias?
It's going to be hard to make spiders off Ishkana if your opponent doesn't play something for you to deadweight. So maybe Joe needed to play the 4 main deck Sinister concoctions as well, just to make sure things fired. I'm going to go with Jacob.
Ryan, for you?
So the Marvel deck, it does have a fail rate if you spin it just once or twice. Joe has some of the Sylvan Advocates, Grim Flayers, he can get under that. But a lot has to go right for him to win this match, and we've seen Grim Flayer die to Harness Lightning more than once. I got to give it to Jacob.
Nick Miller's on Jacob as well. It's a clean sweep. Get out the brooms, which means we're all certainly going to be wrong because that's generally how these things work. As we go to our final match here, it will be, make sure I have this right in front of me. Where are you hiding, Chris Anderson? There you are with Teamer Aetherworks against Adam Snook, who is playing black-green aggro. Now, we have 2 black-green decks in the top 8s, Delirium-esque, aggro-esque. Now, Snook's deck just looks weird too, but you can tell what Snook is up to here. Like, he is just trying to be a very, very aggressive deck, Ryan. He's trying to get under you with, like, Gnarlwood Dryad and Grim Flayer, and he's got some removal spells, he's got Gearhulks. Like, it's to the point here where I think his goal is literally just to kill his opponents as fast as possible. Now, of course, white aggressive strategies are a little bit faster, red ones too, but I think this is a pretty aggressive deck and doesn't have as much removal as Joe.
Yeah, this is similar to the build that Eric Froelich played at the Pro Tour. It's just the aggressive Delirium build. It got outclassed in the mirror by the builds that are going bigger, more mid-range, more controlling. You know, not the deadweight builds, but the Emrakul builds with more removal. And that's kind of why this deck was phased out of the format. But when you're looking at more Aetherworks Marvel, a pretty bad matchup for the more mid-rangey decks. Having a clock that comes down faster really matters. The Blossoming Defense will insulate you against the Harness Lightnings that prevent you from killing on time. And Verdurous Gearhulk really lays the beat down. So this deck is capable of pulling off pretty fast wins. And it's kind of configured in a way where it ignores the mirror as an element of the format largely and tries to clock the other decks faster and interact in a way that you wouldn't expect out of most green-black decks. Given the way that the top deck is laid out, I like this build better than traditional green-black. So I think that it has some game against Aetherworks Marvel, but the kind of the nonsense that the Marvel can do when it has its best draws, I do think that they are still going to be problematic for this build.
Patrick, I'll come to you. Obviously, this build of black-green is different. This stands out to you. Of all the decks we've looked at, we knew kind of coming in, black-green Delirium, white-blue Flash, and variants of that deck. Maybe some people are going to play red-black because Jerry Thompson's writing about it. I know Michael Majors did very well with that deck this weekend. Human strategies. As far as black-green decks go, we just kind of assumed that people would just gravitate towards what Brad Nelson did with his build from Knoxville. Makes a lot of sense. Bigger, you're good early, middle, and late. Not great anywhere, but good in most places. This one, what Snook's trying to do is be good in particularly one area, which is the early game. And apparently it's been successful. Now, against a Marvel deck, you have to try to kill them as fast as possible because you can't go long with them. So in that regard, I think he's in a decent spot.
Well, he's better than a lot of other green-black builds, but still an uphill battle. This is one of the matchups that I have personally played a lot.
Okay.
As I got Eric Froelich's list before the Pro Tour via Patrick Chapin and played the green-black side of it against various Marvel decks that Chapin was considering. This matchup is still brutal for green-black. You do have a little bit more game than some of the traditional Delirium builds because you are faster, you are lower to the ground. But again, you can't really interact with the best draws that Marvel has. And even though you're a faster deck, it's not like we're talking about a red deck that Goldfish is on turn 4. Your most explosive draw sometimes can kill maybe on 5 with the Gearhulk, but you still are a little bit on the slower side, and Marvel doesn't give you a whole lot of time.
Marvel does not give you a whole lot of time, Matthias. So Is Snook going to be aggressive enough here, or are these teamer elements from Chris Anderson going to be good enough?
Well, remember that we have, it's not just a straight combo deck anymore, and that's not what the card order players are playing this weekend. We're looking at a lot of red-green or Naya-style Aetherworks decks, so instead of just being all about Emrakuls and Ulamogs, now we're talking about Chandras and Ishkanas. So it starts to look more like this mid-range mirror, which does slow down the Aetherworks deck. It doesn't hit as hard, and the window is going to be bigger for Adam Snook to try to get the game. Now, granted, Ishkana, if it's has Delirium, is still probably an issue for Adam Snook's deck, but I think there's a lot more play. It's much less of a straight race. It's going to feel more like a mid-range matchup.
With Chris on the play here, 2 games to start, pre-sideboard, 3 post-sideboard, do you think the play gives him a huge advantage at all?
I think it's definitely a big deal.
Okay.
It has to be. I mean, this matchup is largely a race. There isn't a whole lot of interaction, so the play is a huge deal.
Okay. For you, Ryan?
Yeah, completely agree there. The Delirium deck, it does kind of hit fast and hard, but it starts on turn 2 most of its draws. If you have Gnarlwood Dryad on 1 untapped lands to go up the curve, you can apply a lot of pressure, but obviously being on the draw slows your clock down, makes you more vulnerable to Harness Lightning.
It's going to be an interesting matchup. Like, this is, of the ones we predicted, we start with, we did Bob Bernal. We think that Jacob's going to probably win there in a runaway unless something obscure happens. We think Friedman is just kind of in a good spot over Mullins, just decklist to decklist and player to player. For Jim Davis, we're giving him the benefit of the doubt, right. I will say, because of Jim's resume, his accomplishments. We think that he wouldn't play this deck unless it was good against a Marvel. For this one, I think it's a little bit more muddy about what we think is going to happen here. Now, my selection for this match is actually going to be Adam Snook. Something jumps out to me where he might just be okay here. I don't think it's great, but at the same time, I'm coming into this tournament giving people benefit of the doubt of, I don't think you would have selected a deck like this unless you could have beaten a Marvel deck, because the Marvel decks now and their upgrades are no surprise. Mm-hmm. If you follow Magic Online, if you follow competitive Magic at all, you know that they've all been trending this direction. They're no longer the all-in decks, and as a result, they aren't as fast and as consistent. And I think you can say this, if Chris doesn't have Marvel on 4, he might just be under some real pressure and some real trouble here. So I'm going to go with Snook.
Yeah, he is. There is much more pressure for him to find Marvel or some other big payoff card very early on in the game than some of the other Marvel matchups we've discussed so far in the top 8. If the play draw was switched, you could probably talk me into Snook in a very close matchup. But with Chris having the benefit of play draw, I'm still going to go with the Marvel deck.
Matthias, for you?
Well, one of the things I like here about Snook's deck is he's got a lot of actual play game 1. I do think it's going to be somewhat difficult for him in the first games, but his sideboard is very good for the matchup. I mean, he's black-green, so they usually gain after sideboarding. I think if Adam Snook can split the first 2 games, I think he can win the match in 5, and that's what I'm going to predict. I'm going to take Adam.
Ryan, for you?
We've seen some matchups for the Marvel deck where Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot gains a very relevant and impactful amount of life when your opponent is attacking for something like 10 or more on a turn. It obviously matters a lot less as this kind of matchup, but I think that the play does just matter too much. The best draws for the Marvel deck are still going to destroy this version of green-black. If Chris is able to assemble good draws on the play, I think he is a favorite, but I do expect this one to go to 5.
Fair enough. Nick Miller will make his final prediction, and he's picking Chris Anderson, who, by the way, he picked at the beginning of the tournament to win the tournament. So Miller time is looking pretty good right now. So those are the 4 matches. Now we make our invitational winner predictions, and we're going to put a wrap on this thing. For me, I'm going to select Jacob Baugh to win this tournament. It's been an impressive year for Jacob. Patrick, you've mentioned this before. He's someone who flies under the radar because he's not loud. Mm-hmm. He doesn't write, but he plays well. He's been consistent all year long. He had to have a good tournament this weekend, and he's had, thus far, outside of Ben Friedman, probably the best one.
Yep.
So for me, I think he's going to keep this going. I love his deck for this bracket. I think his Naya deck is extremely well built. I'm going to go with him.
My prediction is Ben Friedman. I think that he, first of all, benefited the first overall seed. That's a huge deal, having the option to take the play in all of his matchups throughout the elimination rounds. On top of that, I think it's a very good bracket for him. I think there are the beatdown decks that exist aren't really geared towards beating him necessarily. He already beat Jim Davis during the Swiss rounds. And if the complexity of the Marvel mirror match is some of the tactical interactions on the battlefield at times, then I'm going to take Ben Friedman over any of the other Marvel players in this top 8.
Matthias.
Ben Friedman's a great pick for that reason, but I'm going to go back with what you were saying, Cedric, with Jacob Baugh. There's a lot of tactics in these mirrors, but one thing that can help there is the card Nahiri the Harbinger, Jacob was one of the only players playing in this top 8, and it's going to be very good for him with how the bracket looks. Just that diversity that he has in the threats gives him an advantage in these Marvel mirrors, and there's 5 Marvel decks, so Jacob looks like a great pick.
Ryan, we go to you.
There's some pretty messed up cards in Standard right now, whether you're talking about Emrakul, the Promise End, Aetherworks, Marvel, but a card that I've seen win tournaments time and again is Spell Queller. And Jim Davis is the only player with that in the top 8 in a field of 4-mana artifacts. I gotta feel like that gives him some advantage, even if his list does not look to be optimized. I do like Jim in this field. He's a player's champion for a reason. We'll see him in Roanoke, and maybe he'll be coming in as the invitational champion. I'm picking Jim.
Nick Miller's selection is Chris Anderson. You can't switch now.
Right.
If you're Nick, you have to see it through. So he's going to see it through. He's still going to stick with Chris Anderson. And I know we don't have Todd Anderson's pick him up there, but he's picking Jacob/Jim split card. That's Todd's guess.
He's got a pretty good field there if you look at it. He's got
Todd
3 of our 5 picks.
Todd is in a pretty good spot to backdoor into this thing. I know he's going to be watching. He ended up getting 17th place. He needed a top 16 to get in. So it's a real sweat here for him, but he's going to be picking either Jacob or Jim to win this thing, and if he does, he'll be playing in the Players' Championship once again. We take a short break here to get set up. Our players will be heading over to the feature match area, and we are going to be starting our coverage of our elimination rounds here in just a bit. So for Matthias, Ryan, and Patrick, I am Cedric. We'll see you guys back here for the start of our quarterfinals from Atlanta just a bit.